I think the Willed Body program is a very special one, and I have great respect for those folks who are willing to be silent teachers for our medical students and many other members of the medical community. Stephen Labrash directs this effort for JABSOM, so please welcome Stephen.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit about the Willed Body program for the University of Hawaii. Thank Dr. Henshaw for allowing me to speak. I do a lot of weekend courses here. We do a lot of surgical training on the weekend, and so I'm here a lot during the weekend, and we have lunch at about the same time this group usually breaks. And so for a couple of years, we've been seeing people come and go from this area, and we weren't quite sure who they were or what it was all about. And then I'd heard about the mini-med school, and I thought the concept was really cool. And so I've been waiting for a couple of years for the opportunity to share a little bit. Normally, the Willed Body program, I have a patent 25-minute presentation that I do, and Dr. Henshaw told me, well, you got 50 minutes. And so I thought, wow, I need another 25 minutes worth of material. And so I added some stuff. What I added was essentially how we got to where we are today. Bodies have been needed for education and for research for centuries, but there always hasn't been a supply. And so what I thought we would do is spend the first part of this kind of explaining how we got to where we're at. Some really sordid things, some really shady things. But to understand the big picture, I think it's necessary sometimes for us to understand these strange picadillos. The first organized body dissections started about 2,200 years ago. And for a brief period of time, it was accepted within the community that the body could be studied and dissected. But then some strange things kind of happened. Religion kind of came more into more power, more control. And the idea with all the major religions is the same. The human body is sacred. And how dare we cut that human body or dissect that human body? And so for many hundreds of years, we got away from dissecting. And we started to learn anatomy through animal dissection, which is fine if you're a veterinarian, but if you're a human doctor, it doesn't exactly fit the way we want it to. Claudius Galen is what I'm going to call the first great anatomist. Claudius came from a very wealthy family. At the time he was born, the two occupations that were the most revered within society were engineers and politicians. And so Galen's family wanted him to follow those pursuits, and that was the plan, that was the original intention. Until Galen was 15 years old, his dad had a very unique dream. In this dream, he saw his son as not just a doctor, but a world-famous surgeon who changed the world. This dream was so impactful to him that when Galen woke up in the morning, he shared the dream with them, and together they decided maybe medicine is the way for him to go. So a year later, when he was 16, Galen went to study medicine. Galen's father died a couple years later, and so about the time Galen finished his medical education, his dad died. Well, this left him with a huge inheritance. And so Galen was in the very envious position of not having to do anything. He could literally do whatever he wanted to in life. And what he wanted to do is he wanted to study medicine. Not just medicine in Europe, he wanted to study medicine in Asia. He wanted to study medicine in Africa. He wanted to go all around the world and see eclectically how are other people doing the same medicine, and he accumulated all of this knowledge. 9 years later, he came back to his hometown, which happened to be a training center for a gladiator school. And so he thought, wow, what a great way to learn anatomy. If I become a gladiator surgeon, then those wounds, those horrific wounds that gladiators get, are essentially windows into the body. And so this allowed him to learn more anatomy that way. While Galen was traveling the world, he realized that most civilizations were dissecting animals. And the animal that he thought had the most value for dissecting, because it's comparative anatomy to humans, were primates. And so Galen got most of his knowledge from dissecting apes. Leonardo Da Vinci was not an anatomist per se. He was not a medical doctor. He was a sculptor. Of course, he was a great engineer. He was an incredible artist. But Leonardo did some human dissection. Now, it wasn't until he was almost 50 years old that he started dissecting human bodies, so it was well late into his lifetime, but he gave us some really intricate impressions of anatomy. Leonardo did not approach the human body as a doctor would. He approached the human body as an engineer would. So he was really interested in the bones, the muscles, the nerves, the blood supply, the traffic of the body is what he was interested in. And his idea was to be able to apply those concepts to other types of engineering, and he was quite successful, of course, in doing that. Andreas Vesalius, another great anatomist, was in the enviable position of, number one, being from a family of physicians, very well-known physicians, and he also happened to be born in France. Now, the reason that this was a big deal is because France was one of those countries that was a little more liberal with their access to cadavers. The rest of the world only had executed prisoners is who you could dissect, but France allowed for indigent people, people with no family. Those bodies could also be used for education, and so he took advantage of that. Andreas, when he was a child, had a huge interest in anatomy, and so he didn't wait until he went to medical school. He started dissecting animals when he was a kid. When he was 18, he enrolled into medical school. Excuse me. He enrolled into medical school, and he was one of these people that jumped at the opportunity to study anatomy. One of the things that bothered him was the fact that we were studying from text that Galen wrote 1,400 years earlier. They were studying from text where the anatomy was from animals, and that bothered him. He said, I'm going to be a human doctor. I need to study human anatomy. So he took every opportunity he could to do that. Now, the way that he accessed bodies back then is through the gallows, through execution places. And the bodies would be executed, they would be left to rot, and then they would be thrown outside of the city. And outside the city, they had packs of wild dogs, and like I said, it was going to get really dark. They had packs of wild dogs, and so as a medical student, he would dissect decomposing bodies. And he did this to learn the fundamentals of the body. His knowledge base grew incredibly, and his ability to explain that to other people also grew. He started medical school at 18. By the time he was 22, 4 years later, he was teaching at that same medical school. The way that they taught anatomy in his day was the surgeon would give the lecture, the barber surgeon, who's the one that did the procedure, would do the dissecting, and all the students would sit in amphitheater kind of seating and look down and try to see what's going on. He changed the way we did that because he wanted to do the lecture. He also wanted to do the dissection. He also had a real flair for being artistic. He had artists do his drawings, as most anatomists did, but if I was studying the leg, the traditional doctor, anatomist, would have the artist draw pictures of the leg on the table where it was dissected, let's say. Andreas said, no, let's not do that. Let's show the body in motion. So that same leg dissection would be shown on a farmer standing in the field with a plow. And it was flayed open so they could see it. So he wanted more of a clinical approach to the artistry versus a static approach that they had before. Grave robbing, probably the darkest of the history that we're going to be covering today. Because there was more and more medical schools, and they needed more cadavers, and they only killed criminals so often, a lot of schools resorted to buying cadavers that were stolen from graves. A proficient resurrectionist, which is what they called themselves, could, in 20 minutes, jump over the wall, dig the hole, pull the body out, crack the top of the casket, pull the body out, undress the body, and put him back over the wall in 20 minutes. Now, why would they undress the body? Well, they undressed the body because stealing a human body was not against the law. But stealing the clothes on a human body was. So if I was transporting a body to the medical school, If that body was naked and the police caught me, they would make me go back to the cemetery. They'd have me redig the hole. They'd have me put the body back in. They'd probably give me a beating, but they wouldn't arrest me. If that person had shoes or pants on, now that's an arrestable offense because you've stolen the shoes or the pants. And so they started transporting the people completely naked. Stealing bodies, oh, you know what? I said that was the darkest part. I lied. This is the darkest part. Burke and Hare, two characters from Edinburgh, England, had discovered kind of by chance that instead of going to a cemetery and digging up somebody who's already dead, let's kill somebody, and then we can sell the body that way. And the first time they did this, they didn't kill the person. The first time they kind of came upon it quasi-honestly. One of the two, I don't remember which, had an inn. And so travelers would rent rooms for the day, kind of like a hotel. And they had one particular traveler who came in and he got a little bit sick and he extended his stay a little bit. And he died overnight. They went in the next morning and they're going through his stuff. They're looking for his money. He did not pay for the room. Well, they found no money. And so this made them mad. And so they thought, well, we should sell his body to the medical school. So they put him in a wheelbarrow. They rolled him down to the medical school. And they sold him to the school for £8, which was way more money than they would have gotten for renting the room. Well, it didn't take long before these two guys discovered, hey, we could kind of manufacture dead people by killing them. And the way that they did this, they would target people who were drunks. They would target people who were just traveling through. They would give them lots of liquor to get them all drunk. They would take them back to the inn for more free booze. At some point, either Burke or Hare would sneak up behind the person, cover their mouth and their nose. They would drag them down to the ground, and then the other one would sit on their chest. Now, the combination of having your nose and mouth covered and somebody sitting on your chest means you can't breathe. And so they were suffocating people, which for them worked out well because it left no marks on the body. They then took that body and they took it to the medical school and sold it to Dr. Knox for dissection. And he had noticed that, wow, they keep bringing me these bodies that are in pristine condition. They did this for 2 years, they got away with this. So we don't know exactly how many people they did this to, but it's probably a pretty good number. What happened is they had one of their neighbors complain to the police that there's a dead body in this room over here. So the police went to investigate. They found a body in the corner underneath a pile of straw. They also found a big wooden box in the room with Dr. Knox's name written on the top of the box. When they pried the lid off, they found that there was another dead body in the box. So there was no question from the police that these guys were killing people. The problem was, how do we prove it? You know, the autopsy technology, the forensics of the day was not able to prove that somebody killed them in the way that they killed them. And so Hare became a government witness, and he testified against Burke. And Burke got convicted of killing multiple people. He was hung, and for those of you that like social justice, his body was then sent to the medical school and dissected. Hare's life wasn't too much better. He became indigent, he lost his sight, and the last anybody knows, he was a blind beggar on the streets. Anatomy riots. So as you guys can imagine, the idea, you have a loved one, you had to bury them, and now somebody comes behind you and steals their body. I can't think of many more ways that are going to, that gets you, right? That gets you in the gut. And so it's not surprising that people were really upset about this. And they were really upset about it, and they knew where the bodies were going. They knew that they were going to the medical schools. And so we had riots, a bunch of them as a matter of fact. Columbia College, we now call it Columbia University, very prestigious college. On April 13th, 1788, some boys playing next to New York Hospital, then the site of a private medical school, saw a severed arm either hanging out or being waved outside of one of the windows at the top of the building. The accounts differ on the grisly details. One of the boys told his father, and in some versions of the tale, the severed arm belonged to the boy's recently deceased mother. Enraged at this apparent desecration of the dead, the boy's father assembled a group of fellow workmen who forced their way into the hospital, ransacked the rooms, forced the doctors and students to flee. The group hauled teaching specimens and medical equipment into the streets, setting them ablaze. The New York riots of 1788 is only the most famous of about 24 resurrection riots that took place in the United States between the nation's founding and the late 19th century. These riots were named for the resurrection men, also called Sachem men, essentially professional thieves who dug up fresh corpses from local burying grounds and sold them to the medical schools for dissecting. The resurrection men were one of our less savory inheritances from Britain. While countries such as Germany, France, and Italy had for centuries enjoyed provisions that allowed the bodies of the poor and unclaimed to be dissected, under British and later American law, only executed prisoners could be dissected. As the number of medical schools boomed in the 19th century in America, from 4 in 1800 to over 160 in 1900, the supply of legal cadavers was far too few. The idea of somebody being used for dissection was perceived as a really negative thing. And this is part of the reason why. The Murder Act, what this act said was, if somebody commits a crime that is particularly heinous, not only are we going to punish them in life, but when they die, their bodies are going to be dissected. It's that connection that caused people to equate dissection of a body with really bad people. And it's not the kind of thing people wanted to be associated with. In the 1930s, the Anatomy Acts in both England and America reflected the same Anatomy Acts that they already had in France and Germany and Italy, where unclaimed bodies, indigent bodies, people with no kin could be donated then for dissection. It gave the hospitals, the asylums, the prisons an opportunity, if they had somebody die at their facility who didn't have any associations, to donate the bodies to medical schools for dissection. So this clearly increased the number of available bodies. Fast forward to today, we currently operate under the Uniform Anatomical Gift Act. It was established in 1968. It's been updated every couple of decades. In 2008, JABSOM was involved in rewriting the rules for Hawaii. And as times change and technologies change, certain things have to be accounted for. And so we were involved with getting it rewritten, and we had it rewritten to a way that we thought was positive for everybody. So what is a willed body program? Well, depending on what part of the country you're at, willed body programs are called different things. If you're from the East Coast, they refer to them as bequeathal programs. As you get into the middle of the country, they refer to them as body donor programs. When you get to the West Coast, including Hawaii, they're considered willed body programs, which I think is probably the most honest of the three terms, because essentially that's what you're doing. You are willing your body to the university for education and or research after you die. So how are the bodies utilized and who benefits? You can donate a body for education and or research. Here in Hawaii, we're 99% education. Very little research goes on with the cadavers here in Hawaii. And realistically, it's because we're not big enough to have companies that want to do research here. It's not worth them coming here for the small number of donors that we actually have. So most of our donors are used for teaching. Gross anatomy, where medical students learn anatomy, is absolutely the most important piece of this pie. I would not have a job if we did not have gross anatomy. If there's ever a year where I don't have cadavers for our medical students, probably find a new director the next year. Thankfully, we're very lucky. In Hawaii, body donation is seen as a more elevated event than it is in the other parts of the country. And I think some of that has to do with the culture in Hawaii, the culture of giving. I think a lot of that has to do with our students, their appreciation in the lab, their levels of respect in the lab. We've also been very fortunate in that there's been some people in the community of very high standing who have chosen body donation. And the media has highlighted that. And so it's brought to the attention of everybody that we even have a body donor program. We don't advertise. And there's no good way for us to advertise. And so when we have the media do a story on James Burns or on somebody else in the community who donated, that brings it to people's attention. And that's one of the reasons why our program has grown year after year. After our students, residents, or new doctors, they have to learn a new set of skills depending on what specialty that they go into. And so they also utilize the cadavers. Hawaii Life Flight, any of the EMT groups, KCC has a paramedic course. And so they utilize our cadavers. And the idea is they want to practice life-saving techniques on a cadaver before they have to do them on us in the real world. So they're practicing intubations, cricoids, chest tubes, all of these things. And we want them to practice on cadavers before they do them on us, right? We don't want to be their practice. Teaching opportunities. Our students and us take a completely different approach to the idea of a body donor than probably most medical schools. All medical schools are governed by the same rules. All medical schools are responsible for adhering to the HIPAA laws, and the HIPAA laws have to do with privacy. And so, unfortunately, there's a lot of medical schools that take a really strict interpretation of this. And so they share no information with the students. I think that's sad. I really do. We take kind of the opposite approach. We figure out how much information can we share without crossing that line. And so, for example, the first day of anatomy, I introduce the students to their mentors, and I share with them the first name of the person they're going to work on, the person's real first name. The students, we know from history, will name the cadaver if they don't know what the person's name is. So what's wrong with knowing what their first name is? We're not giving them last name, we're just giving them first name. What's wrong with knowing what they did for a living? What's wrong with knowing what their cause of death was? And the most important thing that we share with them is their medical history. Because our program is a self-enrolled program, and because of those HIPAA laws, 20 years ago, I could call the hospital and say, hey, Mr. John Doe died, and they'd fax me over his medical history. But because of the privacy laws, they can't do that anymore. The only way now that we get the medical history of John is if he gives it to us. And because we have a self-enrolled program, while John's filling out his paperwork, he's giving us his medical history. Now, do people always tell the truth on their medical history? No. Do they omit stuff? Sure, it happens. But guess what? When my students go to become doctors and they sit across the table from a patient, their patients are going to tell them some untruths as well. And so it's not that big of a thing. We want to establish the concept of this mentor, this silent teacher that they're going to be working on, isn't some anonymous entity. Because the more information they know about this person, the higher the level of respect is in the lab. I will share as much information as the donors and the families want me to share. Let me give you an example of that. The first year I was here, one of our donors was a professor at UH. And his daughter gave me a call, and we were just kind of chit-chatting a little bit. And she had mentioned that he wrote an autobiography. Prior to becoming a professor, he traveled the world, he went to Alaska, he helped lay the Alaska pipeline, he did a lot of really interesting things. And so she gave me his autobiography. The first day of anatomy, I casually let the students know at his station, oh, by the way, I have his autobiography if anybody's interested. Now, when I said that, I didn't actually expect any of them to read it. And keep in mind that medical students, we expect them to learn a lot of stuff. We expect them to read a lot of books, and they don't have time to breathe sometimes, much less read an additional autobiography. But that first semester, every student at his station read the autobiography. Now, this autobiography did not help them with their exams. It did not help them with their test. It did not increase their ranking within the students. They did it because they wanted to know about him. Now, how high of a level of respect do you think these students had? It was where it should be. And so the more information that we can share with the students, the more information we try to. Essentially, everybody benefits, right? That whole list of people that I said benefit from the donation, all the doctors and the EMTs and whatnot, but the community at large is also benefiting. The more educated medical providers we have, the better we are taken care of. And so it's definitely a trickle down. Nuts and bolts here, time frame. Okay, Steve, if somebody is donated, how long are you going to have them? Well, we're going to have them in a window between 2 and 18 months. Those that are towards the 18-month side, you have to understand how we teach anatomy. Our anatomy course is a year-long course. So it starts in September, it ends in June. So if somebody is teaching medical student anatomy, we've got them for a year at least, and then depending on how soon they die before the course starts, adds on how many months. And so that's why 18 months is kind of our upper end. On average, we're doing 4 months. Now, we're really sensitive to the needs of the family. We certainly want the families to be happy with the program. It serves nobody well to have families upset with the program. So, for example, last year we had a family, mom was approaching her 90th birthday. She lived on the Big Island, and the family was going to have a big reunion, and so they set the reunion for February. Mom died in January. So they still wanted to have the reunion. The family called us and they says, hey, what's the chances of us getting the cremains back within the month? And we looked at our schedule. There was some other teaching courses that were a little shorter, that were a little faster track. And so what we did is we simply directed her in that route. So she was able to teach, and then we were able to do the cremation shortly and get it back to the family. So at the reunion, they were able to scatter the cremains themselves. And so, we want to obviously work with the families. Our students do an annual memorial service, and very honestly, this is the reason why our program keeps growing, is the memorial service. It's completely put on by the medical students. I'm there for guidance, but I let them do what they want to do within reason. Right now, the students are in the planning stage for our April 13th memorial service for this year, and I've got a group of students that are working on a hula. I've got students who are going to be speakers at the program. I've got students who are going to be playing music at the program. Whatever the personality of the class, it changes a little bit each year. Now, my background, I'm a funeral director. I'm a mortician, not a doctor, not an anatomist. I graduated from mortuary college. My dad gives me a little bit of grief because this memorial service is the one day a year where I actually do what I went to school for. And he's not wrong. We invite the families and the friends of the donors to come and help us celebrate. When we first moved into this building or this campus, we did the memorial services in our auditorium. Seats about 150-ish people. We outgrew that as the program grew. So then we went to the Manoa campus. They got the campus center ballroom. Seats about 600 people if you configure the chairs correctly. So for a couple years, we've been doing it there. We've now outgrown the ballroom. This year will be the first year we're doing the service at Farmington High School. We picked Farmington High School because they can accommodate 1,000 people. So hopefully, knock on wood, hopefully we'll be able to use Farmington High School for a couple years. After the memorial service, we have a canoe scattering service. When people sign up to be body donors, because our program is a self-enrolled program, we ask them, hey, what do you want done with your cremains? And really, they only have 2 choices. First choice is we can return them to somebody. Doesn't have to be family, it could be whoever they want, but we need a name and a phone number and an address so we can get it to them. The second choice is for us to scatter those cremains. Our donors are about 50-50. About half of them want scatter, half of them want returned. And so after the memorial service, we load the cremains onto canoes. For the last couple years, we've been paddling off of Magic Island, the Waikiki side of Magic Island. The state tells us we have to go past the buoys on the tip of Magic Island. So there's a green buoy and an orange buoy, but they don't tell us how far we have to go past the buoys. And so we go just past the buoys. And what's nice about that is it's still within eyesight of the families. These guys are playing some kind of sport across the street. That's how far the families are to the cremains being scattered. Now, this is, when we first started doing it, I didn't think anything of it. But afterwards, in talking to the families, sometimes several years later, it was a genius idea. Because now the families who may not know what to do with an urn full of cremains, they have a closure place. They know where the cremains were scattered. They could go to that point anytime they want to, and the buoys are always there. So on anniversaries, on birth dates, talk to families on days that are important, people still have somewhere to go for connection. And obviously that's really important. So who can donate? Well, anybody that can legally sign a contract can donate. We're concerned about contagious diseases. Now, I'm sure you guys can appreciate, I don't want to expose any of my students. I don't want to expose my surgeons to any contagious diseases. So we're not accepting people with contagious diseases, specifically hepatitis B and hepatitis C, HIV, active tuberculosis, and any of the prion diseases of the brain. And so that's kind of our criteria. We do have a weight limit of 300 pounds. It's kind of a loose weight limit. If somebody comes to the medical school, and they're on the gurney and they're over 300 pounds, I'm not sending them back. And people tend to, what's the opposite of exaggerate? People tend to underestimate their weight. My wife, according to her driver's license, is 160 pounds. And she's not here, so I can say that. But the problem we have with people over 300 pounds is really an issue of practicality. If you guys were to come into my morgue, you would see that I have one wall where I have sliding trays, and there's a framework around those trays. And so if somebody's more than 300 pounds, I'm not putting them on a tray and closing that tray. So it's really an issue of practicality. That being said, we get people over 300 pounds all the time. We just direct them towards a shorter course so it doesn't impact the overall morgue and things that we do. There's a couple different ways people can get information. That's our office phone number to the Willed Body Program. That's also our email to the Willed Body Program. We have donor packets. After the course is over, if anybody's interested, and again, I didn't come here to pimp the program. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to get more donors. That's not what I'm trying to do. All I'm trying to do is share with you information about what our body donor program is. I'll be honest with you, body donation is not for everybody. I would say a relatively small percentage of the population is probably suitable for body donation. And there's a lot of things that would make you unsuitable. If you come from a very traditional family where you have visitation and funeral mass and all those things, and that's the tradition, that's not somebody that wants to come into body donation because you're changing that tradition, and you shouldn't change the traditions. But if you're somebody who doesn't know what you're going to do, doesn't have any ideas or doesn't think about it, then it's something to consider. So that's the purpose of me being here today, is just to give you something to consider. Are there restrictions? There are. We covered some of those. We talked about the contagious diseases. We talked about the weight. What I want to talk about is if the university is not notified within 72 hours after death. Now, this has been on our facts page since before I got here. And the lawyers for our program have decided, we don't want donors. This is my lawyer talking. We don't want donors who maybe died at home unattended. Maybe nobody checked on them for a couple days. And it's not until the neighbor starts to smell something kind of funny that somebody realizes we need to check on somebody. Well, at that point with the body, there's not a lot of education we can do with it. So officially, that's going to stay on our facts page. Unofficially, that doesn't matter to me. I kind of consider, and I'm really fortunate that I'm given this leeway. I'm really fortunate that my chain of bosses allows me to run the program as I want to run the program. And one of the things that I feel pretty strongly about is when somebody fills out the paperwork to donate their body, that's a contract. And they're agreeing to give us their body, and we're agreeing to take their body. Is it their fault that something happened and they died unattended? Is it their fault that they got in a car accident on the freeway and are now having to be autopsied? These are areas where the lawyers say that we can refuse the body. And we can. The reality is, I've been here for going on 16 years. I've never refused a body. Everybody that signed up for the program, you're in for good. And as long as I'm here, that's the way it's going to stay. Now, that doesn't mean the guy that or the girl that replaces me is going to have different philosophy, but that's my philosophy at least. I have a wonderful staff. Stacy Lenz is one of my lab gurus. She helps me with everything from surgical training to embalming. Mari Kuriyama-tan, I have a laser button on here. Ooh, look at this. Mari is, she's our full-time secretary. She's our administrator. If you call the program, if you send an email, if you correspond in any way, chances are really good that Mari and Lee's my wife. She's the one that I'm glad wasn't here when I made that statement. They're both administrators for the program, and they do a phenomenal job. And a really key piece to this is right here. This is Dr. Takashi Matsui. He's my boss. He's the department chair. I have to tell you guys, prior to coming to the University of Hawaii, I was at another medical school, and I did not have a fraction of the support at that school that I have here. Complete night and day situation. Dr. Takashi Matsui is incredibly supportive, as the prior chair was, incredibly supportive. They know the value of what we're doing, they understand it, they appreciate it, and he makes my life very simple. All right, it says questions, but don't ask questions. What I want to do, if I do this successfully, is I want to show you guys a short video. It's only 3.5 minutes. It's a memorial service from beginning to end, condensed. Thank you. Now I'll take questions if there's any questions.
I have one, Stephen.
Please.
I noticed up there, if you've signed up to be an organ donor, that makes you not eligible to be a body donor?
So officially on our fact sheet, that is what it says. But when I moved to Hawaii, I used to work for, at the time they were called the Hawaiian Organ Bank. They've changed names now. They're now Legacy of Life. Absolutely, we support both. As a matter of fact, Mari, our secretary, her mom was the first person in the state of Hawaii to be both an organ donor and a body donor. And so it's obviously something we really support.
Let's give Stephen another round of applause. Mahalo.
Thank you.